I woke up to beige walls and the sharp smell of disinfectant. My body felt heavy, wrong, like I'd been underwater for days and someone had just pulled me to the surface. I didn't recognize the room. Industrial bed rails on either side of me, a shared bathroom visible through a half-open door. Behind a thin curtain to my left, someone was snoring, deep, rattling breaths that told me I wasn't alone. A nurse in pink scrubs smiled at me from the doorway. "Good morning, sweetie. How are we feeling today?" My throat was dry, my tongue thick. Where am I? Her smile didn't waver, but something in her eyes shifted. Practiced sympathy, like she'd answered this question 100 times before. "You're at Meadowbrook Senior living in Denver. You've been here about a month now." About a month? My hands gripped the bed rails. A month? That couldn't be right. I'd gone in for gallbladder surgery 5 days ago, maybe 6? My son Kenneth had driven me to Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center that Tuesday morning, promised he'd handle everything while I recovered. I remembered the pre-op room, the IV going in, the anesthesiologist's voice telling me to count backward from 10, then nothing. Just a black hole where the last month should have been. "I need to go home," I said, trying to sit up. My hands shook. Post-surgery weakness made me fumble with the bed controls. My arms felt like they belonged to someone else. The nurse gently stopped me, her hand firm on my shoulder. "Honey, let's not get agitated. You're exactly where you need to be." Agitated? I wasn't agitated. I was confused. My pulse quickened, a drumbeat in my ears. My house. "I need to call someone about my house. I need to—" "Sweetie," she interrupted, glancing at the chart clipped to the end of my bed, then back at me. "Your son Kenneth said you get confused about this sometimes. He sold that house 3 weeks ago to cover your care here." The words didn't land at first. They just hung in the air between us, nonsensical. Sold? Kenneth sold my house? That's not— My voice cracked. "No, he wouldn't. That's my house. The Montbello bungalow I've owned since 1983. 42 years of memories. My late husband Gerard's workshop is still in the basement. The photo albums are in the hall closet. That house is worth $340,000 in equity." The nurse touched my shoulder again, softer this time. Pity mixed with something else. Exhaustion, maybe. "All our dementia patients say that, honey. It's very common. Your son brought all the paperwork. Everything's been handled. You're in good hands." Dementia patients. She thought I had dementia. My hands trembled harder now, not from surgery, but from something colder, sharper. "I never agreed to this. I don't have dementia. I'm not confused." But she'd already turned away, adjusting the IV pole beside my bed. "Let's check your vitals, okay? Then we'll get you some breakfast." I lay back against the thin pillow, staring at those beige walls, my chest tight. Kenneth sold my house. Kenneth told them I have dementia. Kenneth put me here. Elder abuse hidden behind paperwork happens every day. Subscribe to see how Rosetta fought back. Where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments. Let me back up. You need to understand what that house meant. What Kenneth took from me. 2 months before my surgery, in early September, Kenneth had stopped by on a Sunday afternoon. He'd been quieter than usual, standing in my kitchen with his hands in his pockets while I made coffee. Then, casually, too casually, he'd asked, "Mom, have you updated your will lately? You know, just in case?" I'd laughed it off. Just in case of what? I was 66 years old, healthy, active. I had my bookkeeping clients, my church group, my morning walks around the neighborhood. I wasn't planning on going anywhere. "Kenneth, I'm fine," I'd told him. "Stop worrying." But he'd pressed. "I'm just saying, Mom, it's smart to have things in order. What if something happens? Have you thought about simplifying your assets, making things easier to manage?" At the time, it felt like concern. Normal son worrying about his aging mother stuff. Now, lying in that nursing home bed, those words felt like reconnaissance. He'd been planning this, measuring my life in dollar signs. Now here's what you need to understand about power of attorney. It's supposed to protect you, not trap you. I'd signed that POA document 5 years ago when Gerard, my husband, was dying of a heart attack. Kenneth was my only child, my son. Of course I trusted him. The paperwork said he could make medical and financial decisions if I ever became incapacitated. It was supposed to be a safety net. I never imagined he'd use it as a weapon. 3 days into my stay at Meadowbrook, though I didn't know it had been 3 days at the time, the medication made everything blur. I started noticing things. A nurse would come in 3 times a day with a small paper cup. 2 pills. "You're Ativan," she'd say. "Doctor's orders." Ativan, a sedative. I'd worked as a legal secretary for 30 years. I knew what Ativan was used for: anxiety, agitation, but I'd never been prescribed Ativan in my life. When I asked which doctor had ordered it, the nurse just smiled. "It's in your chart, sweetheart. Your son Kenneth said you get combative when you're confused." Combative? Confused. The drugs made me foggy. My thoughts moved like molasses. I'd try to remember what day it was, what month, how long I'd actually been here, but the answers slipped away. My hands shook constantly. My mouth felt dry. And every time I protested, "I don't need this medication, I'm not confused," the staff would exchange those knowing looks, the looks that said, "See, this is exactly what dementia patients do." They were chemically restraining me to match Kenneth's narrative. By what must have been day 5, maybe 6, I finally had a moment of clarity between doses. My roommate was at physical therapy. The nurse had left my door cracked open. I could hear voices in the hallway, the distant sound of a television, someone laughing, and I thought, I need to call someone. My best friend, Gwendolyn Pierce. My attorney, Martin Schaefer. Anyone. But when I tried to use the phone on my bedside table, it wouldn't dial out. Outgoing calls blocked. I waited until a nurse walked by, then asked if I could use a different phone. She hesitated. "Your son requested we limit phone access. He said you sometimes make inappropriate calls and upset yourself." Inappropriate calls. Translation: calls that might expose what he'd done. That afternoon, I convinced a younger aide, someone new, someone who didn't know the rules yet, to let me use the nurse's station phone. I called my bank. When the representative answered, I gave her my account number, my social security number, my mother's maiden name, all the security questions I'd memorized decades ago. "Mrs. Williamson," she said, her voice careful, "your accounts were placed under conservatorship management on September 30th. I'm showing that all transactions now require approval from Kenneth Williamson, listed as your appointed conservator." My stomach dropped. "What transactions? What's been taken out?" A pause, the clicking of keys. "Ma'am, I'm seeing your pension direct deposit of $2,100 monthly has been redirected to an account titled Williamson Trust Management. Your savings account shows a balance of $200. There was a large transfer in April of $78,000 to, it looks like a different institution, and in October, a transfer of $214,000 was processed. $214,000, more than half the value of my house. Where did it go?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't have details on the receiving account, ma'am. You'd need to speak with your conservator." My conservator. My son. The man who'd put me here. I hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I was trapped. No money, no phone access, no way to hire a lawyer or fight back. Kenneth had locked me in this place and thrown away the key, but he'd made one mistake. One critical miscalculation. Have you ever realized the people you trusted most were counting on you being too weak to fight back? 4 days later, November 7th by my count, though the days still bled together, I had another clear window between medication doses. I demanded to see my admission paperwork. A new nurse, someone who hadn't been trained to dismiss me yet, brought me the folder. Inside was a physician's certification of incapacity. Dated September 29th, one day before Kenneth moved me to Meadowbrook. Signed by Dr. Harrison Chen, listed as my primary care physician. The document described progressive memory loss over the past 18 months, inability to manage personal finances, 3 documented wandering episodes in August 2024, and significant cognitive decline requiring supervised living. I read it twice, then a third time. Dr. Harrison Chen. I hadn't seen that man since 2020. He'd retired, moved to Arizona, sent me a card when he closed his practice. And I'd never had wandering episodes. In August 2024, I'd been installing security cameras in my house after catching Kenneth snooping through my study. Then I saw the signature line. Rosetta Marie Williamson. My full middle name. Marie. I never signed my full middle name. Ever. Not on checks, not on legal documents, not on birthday cards. I sign Rosetta M. Williamson, or just Rosetta Williamson. It's been that way for 40 years. This certification was forged. Kenneth hadn't just manipulated real paperwork. He'd fabricated medical documentation. He'd invented a doctor's diagnosis. He'd created an entire false history to justify locking me away. And suddenly, through the fog of those sedatives, I understood. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't desperation. This was premeditated fraud. Kenneth had been planning this for months, maybe longer. But here's what Kenneth didn't know, what he couldn't have known. I'd been a legal secretary for 3 decades. I'd worked in estate law, family law, elder law. I'd seen cases like this before. Adult children who saw their aging parents as ATMs, who forged signatures, who exploited trust. And I'd learned one critical lesson: protect yourself before you need protection. In August 2024, 3 months before my surgery, I'd noticed Kenneth acting strange. He'd stopped by twice when I wasn't home. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, mentioned seeing his car in the driveway. When I asked him about it, he'd said he was looking for Dad's old tools. But Gerard's tools were in the basement workshop, and Kenneth had barely set foot in that workshop since his father died. So I'd taken precautions. I'd moved $78,000 from my savings account into a locked safety deposit box at First Bank downtown. Cash and bearer bonds Kenneth couldn't trace, couldn't touch. I'd met with my longtime attorney, Martin Schaefer, the man who'd handled Gerard's estate, and left him a sealed envelope with specific instructions. Open only if I'm ever declared incompetent without my explicit consent. And I'd installed 4 discrete security cameras in my home. Living room, kitchen, study, front entry, all connected to cloud backup that uploaded automatically. Kenneth never noticed them. He was too focused on rifling through my documents, photographing my financial statements, calculating how much my house was worth. Little did Kenneth know, his mother had been 10 steps ahead of him for months. Those cameras had been recording. September 21st, 1 week before my surgery. Kenneth had let himself into my house while I was at church. He'd brought someone with him, a man in a cheap suit carrying a briefcase. I'd watch the footage later after everything unraveled. Watch them walk through my living room, the man taking measurements, Kenneth gesturing toward walls, toward Gerard's workshop, talking about staging and market value. And then they'd sat at my kitchen table, and Kenneth had said, his voice clear as day on that recording, "We need this done before she comes out of surgery. Once she's placed, she can't fight it. The house goes on the market October 2nd. I need the cash by mid-October." He'd planned every step: surgery date, nursing home placement, house sale, all of it mapped out while I was still healthy, still coherent, still trusting him. But now, lying in that Meadowbrook bed, drugged and isolated and erased, I had something Kenneth didn't expect: proof, evidence, documentation, and a lawyer who owed me a favor. I closed my eyes, felt the weight of the Ativan pulling me back under, and thought, he has no idea what's coming. Kenneth thought he'd buried me. He thought the sedatives would keep me compliant, the isolation would keep me silent, the forged paperwork would keep me trapped. He was wrong, because I'd spent 30 years learning how the system works, and now I was going to use every bit of that knowledge to tear his plan apart. But before I tell you how I fought back, you need to understand what Kenneth took from me, what that house meant, what I sacrificed to give him the life he destroyed. Gerard and I bought that Montbello bungalow in 1983 for $42,000. I was 24 years old, 3 months pregnant with Kenneth, and terrified we couldn't afford it. Gerard worked as a machinist at a manufacturing plant in Commerce City. I was a legal secretary at a small estate planning firm downtown. Together, we barely scraped together the down payment. But Gerard had walked through that house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a basement he said he could turn into a workshop, and he'd smiled in a way I hadn't seen since our wedding day. "Rosetta," he'd said, squeezing my hand, "we're gonna raise our family here." And we did. Kenneth was born that December. We painted his nursery pale yellow because we didn't know if he'd be a boy or a girl. Gerard built the crib himself in that basement workshop, sanding every edge smooth so our baby wouldn't get splinters. I can still smell the sawdust, hear the sound of Gerard humming while he worked. We filled that house with life. Birthday parties where neighborhood kids ran through the backyard. Thanksgiving dinners where Gerard's turkey was always too dry and my sweet potato pie made up for it. Christmas mornings where Kenneth would tear through wrapping paper, leaving a trail from the tree to the couch. Kenneth was a quiet kid, thoughtful. He'd sit at the kitchen table doing homework while I cooked dinner, asking me questions about my day, about the law cases I was typing up. He wanted to understand everything, how contracts worked, why people needed lawyers, what happened when families fought over money. "Mom," he'd asked once when he was maybe 12, "what happens if someone dies and they don't have a will?" "The state decides," I told him. "That's why people need to plan ahead, protect what they've built." I thought I was teaching him to be responsible. I didn't realize I was teaching him how to steal. Gerard died 2 years ago, November 2023, heart attack in the basement workshop. He'd been restoring an old table saw he'd found at an estate sale. I'd called down to tell him dinner was ready, and when he didn't answer, I went downstairs and found him slumped against the workbench, tools still in his hands. The funeral was small. Kenneth stood beside me at the burial, his arm around my shoulders. "Don't worry, Mom," he'd said. "I'll take care of you, whatever you need." At the time, it felt like comfort. Now I know it was a promise with an expiration date. After Gerard died, I was devastated but self-sufficient. I had his pension, $800 a month. My own pension from the law firm, $2,100 monthly. I'd kept my bookkeeping clients, 3 small businesses I did taxes and payroll for. I had my church, my book club, my Tuesday morning walks with my best friend, Gwendolyn Pierce. I didn't need saving. I needed time to grieve. But Kenneth, my son Kenneth, the pharmaceutical sales rep with the Highlands Ranch rental and the private school tuition, he was struggling. I didn't know how much. Not then. His wife, Cherise, 35, always wanted more. Bigger house, nicer cars, vacations to places I couldn't pronounce. She'd drop hints every time they visited. Kenneth's colleagues all live in Highlands Ranch estates, not rentals. The kids' school just raised tuition again. It's getting so expensive. I'd helped when I could, paid for the kids' dental work one year, covered their car repair another time. It never felt like enough for Cherise. Last Thanksgiving, November 2023, just weeks after Gerard's funeral, they'd all come over. Kenneth's 2 kids, ages 11 and 13 then, had run through the house like Kenneth used to, making noise and mess and memories. Cherise had stood in my kitchen, looking around with this expression I couldn't quite read. "This house is too big for one person, don't you think?" she'd said, her voice sweet as pie. "Have you considered something more manageable? A nice condo, maybe? You'd have less maintenance to worry about." I'd smiled politely, poured her more wine. "I like my space. Besides, this is where Gerard and I built our life. I'm not ready to leave it." She'd nodded, sipped her wine, changed the subject. I didn't realize she was measuring square footage. calculating equity, planning my exit. I can't imagine discovering your own child had been counting your assets like an accountant preparing for liquidation. By April 2024, 7 months before my surgery, Kenneth's questions got more pointed. He'd stop by on Sunday afternoons, always alone, always when Charisse was busy with the kids. He'd sit at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd done homework as a boy, and ask about my finances. "Mom, have you thought about simplifying things? You've got multiple accounts, the house, Dad's pension. What if something happens to you? Have you updated your will?" I'd brushed it off. "Kenneth, I'm 66, not 86. I'm healthy, active. Stop worrying." But he kept pushing. "I'm just saying, it's smart to have things in order. What about power of attorney? Do you have that set up? What if you get sick and can't make decisions?" I'd signed POA documents years ago when Gerard was dying. Kenneth was my only child. Of course I'd put him down as the person to make decisions if I couldn't. "It's all handled," I'd assured him. "Martin Schaefer has copies of everything." Martin Schaefer, my attorney, the man who'd handled Gerard's estate. Kenneth's jaw had tightened when I mentioned Martin's name. "You still use him?" Kenneth had asked. "Mom, he's old school. You should really consider someone more modern, someone who understands asset protection." Asset protection. Even then, those words should have set off alarms. Remember, Kenneth, my son, the one who'd asked about my will just in case, had been researching how to declare me incompetent for 7 months. Then in August 2024, I caught him, twice. First time I'd come home early from church. I'd forgotten my purse. Kenneth's car was in my driveway. When I walked in, he was in my study, standing at my filing cabinet, drawer open, papers in his hands. "Kenneth? What are you doing?" He jumped, actually jumped like a kid caught stealing cookies. "Mom, you're home early. I was just Dad's tools. I was looking for the key to his workshop. Thought it might be in here." The key to Gerard's workshop was hanging on a hook by the basement door. It had been there for 40 years. "The key's by the basement," I'd said slowly. "Why would it be in my filing cabinet?" He'd laughed, too loud. "Right, of course. I'm an idiot. Just thought maybe Dad kept a spare somewhere." He'd left quickly after that. Second time was 3 weeks later. I'd gone to my Tuesday morning walk with Gwendolyn. Came back an hour later. Kenneth's car, again. This time he was photographing documents on my desk, my bank statements, my will, my property deed. I'd stood in the doorway watching him for a full 10 seconds before I spoke. "Kenneth." He'd spun around, phone in hand, guilt written all over his face. "Mom, there's a family photo I wanted a copy of. Thought it might be in your desk." Family photos were in albums in the hall closet. He knew that. I'd worked in law for 30 years. I knew what asset reconnaissance looked like. I knew what fraud looked like. And in that moment, I knew my son was planning something. I just didn't know what. Not yet. So I took precautions. Quiet precautions. I moved $78,000 from my savings account into a locked safety deposit box at First Bank downtown. Cash and bearer bonds Kenneth couldn't find, couldn't access, couldn't steal. I met with Martin Schaefer and left him a sealed envelope with instructions. "Open this only if I'm ever declared incompetent without my explicit consent." Inside, I'd put copies of my medical records showing 0 cognitive issues, a notarized statement of mental clarity, and a directive to investigate any sudden conservatorship. And I installed cameras, 4 of them. Living room, kitchen, study, front entry, discreet little devices that looked like smoke detectors or phone chargers, all connected to cloud backup that uploaded automatically to an account Kenneth didn't know existed. Kenneth never noticed. He was too busy planning. Has someone you loved ever taken your generosity for granted? Tell me in the comments. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until much later, was that Kenneth had been researching Colorado conservatorship law since February 2024. 7 months of studying how to declare someone incompetent, how to file emergency petitions, how to use medical documentation to prove cognitive decline. He'd met with an estate liquidator in September, a man named Russell Crane who specialized in fast sales for families in crisis. They'd walked through my house while I was at church, Russell taking measurements, Kenneth pointing out features, both of them discussing staging and market value like I was already gone. Kenneth's plan was meticulous. He just needed the right opportunity. And when I scheduled my gallbladder surgery for late September, routine procedure, low risk, just a few days of recovery, Kenneth saw his chance. Looking back now, I can see every move Kenneth made, but in those moments, I was still trying to see the son I raised. The son who'd done homework at my kitchen table, who'd stood beside me at his father's funeral and promised to take care of me, who'd spent his childhood in that house, playing in that basement workshop, eating at that table, sleeping in that yellow-painted bedroom. I kept thinking, he'll come to his senses. He'll remember who I am, what I've done for him. He'll stop. But Kenneth had already decided. By the time I went in for surgery on September 28, 2024, he'd already forged documents, already contacted Meadowbrook, already planned how to erase me from my own life. He just needed me unconscious long enough to make it happen. The medication got worse before I understood what was really happening. 2 days after I discovered Kenneth had frozen my accounts, a nurse I didn't recognize came in with my morning pills. Same routine, small paper cup, 2 pills, a smile. But when I asked what they were, she hesitated. "Your Ativan, sweetheart. Doctor's orders." "Which doctor?" I asked. My voice came out sharper than I intended. She glanced at my chart. "Dr. Chen prescribed it when you were admitted. Your son Kenneth said you need it for agitation." Dr. Chen. The same doctor whose signature was on that forged certification. The doctor who'd retired to Arizona 4 years ago. "I don't need Ativan," I said, pushing the cup away. "I'm not agitated. I'm confused about why I'm here, but that's not the same thing." Her smile tightened. "Mrs. Williamson, if you refuse your medication, I'll have to document that. It's not helpful for your treatment plan." Treatment plan. For a disease I didn't have. But I refused anyway, pushed that cup away and crossed my arms like a stubborn child. The nurse sighed, made a note on her chart, and left. 20 minutes later, a different nurse came in, older, sterner, with the same pills and a tone that left no room for argument. "Mrs. Williamson, you need to take your medication. If you continue to refuse, we'll have to reassess your care level." Reassess my care level. Translation: make things worse for me. I took the pills. What choice did I have? I was trapped in that room, too weak to run, too isolated to call for help. The Ativan dissolved on my tongue, bitter and chemical, and within an hour my thoughts started to blur again. My hands shook. The room felt like it was tilting, and somewhere in a file at the nurse's station, someone wrote, "Patient exhibits agitation consistent with moderate dementia, refuses medication, becoming combative." Combative. Because I asked questions. Because I said no. Remember Kenneth, my 38-year-old son, the pharmaceutical sales rep drowning in debt, had been researching conservatorship law for 7 months before my surgery. That's when I realized the drugs weren't treating anything. They were creating evidence. Every time I protested, every time I asked questions, every time I refused medication, Kenneth's narrative got stronger. Look, she's agitated. Look, she's combative. Look, she's exactly as confused as I said she was. I was being chemically restrained to match his story. There was one nurse, Darlene, her name tag said, who'd worked at Meadowbrook for 12 years. She'd come in to check my vitals on November 5th, and I'd caught her looking at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity, something closer to doubt. "You seem pretty sharp," she'd said quietly, adjusting the blood pressure cuff on my arm. I'd grabbed her wrist, gentle but desperate. "I am sharp. I don't have dementia. My son, he did this. He forged paperwork. I need help." She'd pulled back slowly, her eyes darting to the door. Mrs. Williamson, I understand you're upset, but your son brought all the documentation, your medical history. It's all in your file. My medical history is fake, I'd said. The doctor who signed it retired 4 years ago. Please, just check. Call Dr. Chen's office in Arizona. You'll see. But she'd already stepped back. That doubt replaced by something harder. Protocol. I'm sorry, Mrs. Williamson. I have to follow your care plan. If you have concerns, you should discuss them with your son. My son. The man who put me here. He forged it. He forged medical records. He forged a doctor's signature. 3 days later, November 6th by my count, I had a small window between medication doses. My thoughts were clearer, sharper. I could think in straight lines again instead of those foggy spirals the Ativan created. A young aide, maybe 22, came in to help me with lunch. She was new, I could tell, didn't have that practiced dismissiveness the other staff had developed. "Can I ask you something?" I said, keeping my voice casual. She smiled. "Sure. Has anyone tried to visit me, a woman maybe, around 70, short silver hair?" The aide's face brightened. "Oh, yes, actually, a lady came by twice. Said she was your friend. Gwen something?" My chest tightened. Gwendolyn Pierce. My best friend of 20 years, the retired paralegal who'd walked with me every Tuesday morning for a decade. "Did she see me?" I asked. The aide shook her head. "No, sorry. The front desk turned her away. Said there was a family request for no visitors during your adjustment period. She seemed really worried, though. Came back a second time on November 5th, but got the same answer. Gwendolyn had tried. Twice. And Kenneth had made sure she couldn't reach me. Do you know if she left a number? Any way I could call her?" The aide's smile faded. "Oh, Mrs. Williamson, your son said you shouldn't make calls right now. He said you sometimes get confused about who people are and it upsets you." Confused about who people are. I knew exactly who Gwendolyn was. I knew exactly who everyone was. That was the problem. I remembered everything, and Kenneth needed me to forget. It gets worse. Subscribe so you don't miss what she discovers next. If you're still not subscribing, tell me in the comments. What's holding you back? That same afternoon, I started putting pieces together. My church, Park Hill United Methodist, where I'd attended services for 18 years, they didn't know where I was. My pastor, Reverend Thompson, he'd visited Gerard in the hospital when Gerard was dying. He'd held my hand at the funeral. If he knew I was in a nursing home against my will, he'd come. But Kenneth had made sure nobody knew. I was completely isolated. No visitors. No phone access. No way to contact the outside world and tell them, "I'm here. I'm trapped. I'm not sick." And Gwendolyn who kept trying, Gwendolyn who'd been my paralegal friend, who knew how legal systems worked. She was the only person suspicious enough to keep pushing. The only one who might figure out something was wrong. If she didn't give up. If she kept digging. If Kenneth didn't convince her, I was too far gone to save. The next day, November 7th, I had my clearest moment in over a week. The medications were wearing off faster. Maybe my body was adjusting. Maybe the dose wasn't enough anymore. I didn't know. But for about 2 hours that morning, my head felt almost normal. I could think. I could plan. I buzzed for a nurse. A different one this time. Someone I hadn't seen before. Young, maybe mid-20s. With kind eyes and a nervous energy that told me she was still learning the job. "Can I see my admission file?" I asked. "I'd like to review my medical information." She hesitated. I'm not sure if—" "I have a right to see my own medical records," I said, using my legal secretary voice. The voice I'd used for 30 years when dealing with difficult attorneys or reluctant witnesses. Firm, professional. The voice of someone who knew exactly what they were entitled to. It worked. She nodded, disappeared for 10 minutes, came back with a manila folder. "I can only give you 15 minutes, she said. "Then I have to take it back to the nurse's station." "That's fine, thank you." My hands shook as I opened the folder. Not from the medication this time, from anticipation, from rage. Inside was the physician's certification of incapacity, dated September 29, 2024, one day before Kenneth moved me to Meadowbrook, signed by Dr. Harrison Chen, with his medical license number printed below his signature. The document was thorough, too thorough. It described progressive memory loss over the past 18 months, beginning approximately March 2023. It noted inability to manage personal finances as evidenced by unpaid bills and confused account statements. It listed 3 documented wandering episodes in August 2024, during which patient became disoriented and was found by neighbors. None of it was true. Not a single word. In March 2023, I'd been managing Gerard's end-of-life care, handling his medical bills, coordinating with his doctors. My finances were immaculate. I'd been a legal secretary, for God's sake. I knew how to keep records. And in August 2024, I hadn't wandered anywhere. I'd been installing security cameras after catching Kenneth snooping through my house, but someone had written this. Someone had invented an entire medical history, complete with specific dates and detailed symptoms. Someone had made me disappear on paper before making me disappear in real life. And then I saw the signature line. Rosetta Marie Williamson, my full middle name, Marie. I stared at it, my vision blurring with tears and fury. I never signed my full middle name. Never. Not on checks, not on contracts, not on legal documents. My signature for 40 years has been Rosetta M. Williamson, or just Rosetta Williamson. It's automatic. It's muscle memory. Whoever forged this document didn't know that. Kenneth didn't know that. He'd made a mistake. A small one, but a mistake, nonetheless. How do you prove you're sane when everyone around you has been told you're not? I closed the folder before the nurse came back, my mind racing. This was fraud. Criminal fraud. Kenneth hadn't just misused his power of attorney. He'd fabricated medical evidence. He'd created a false diagnosis, forged a doctor's signature, invented symptoms that never existed. This wasn't just elder abuse. This was a crime, multiple crimes, and I had proof. But I was still trapped in that room, still drugged, still isolated from everyone who could help me. Having proof meant nothing if I couldn't show it to anyone who mattered. Gwendolyn Pierce, my best friend of 20 years. The retired paralegal had tried to visit me twice and been turned away both times. That's when I understood the full scope of what Kenneth had done. He hadn't just stolen my house and my money, he'd stolen my identity, my credibility, my ability to speak for myself. In that facility, I wasn't Rosetta Williamson, former legal secretary, competent adult, mother who'd raised a son and buried a husband and built a life over 66 years. I was patient with moderate dementia who exhibits combative behavior and paranoid delusions when questioned about her care. Every word I said was filtered through that diagnosis. Every protest was evidence of confusion. Every rational question was proof of cognitive decline. This is how elder exploitation works. It's not violent, it's bureaucratic. Kenneth had learned something I'd spent 30 years seeing in my legal work. The most effective way to destroy someone isn't with fists or weapons. It's with paperwork, with official documentation, with signatures and stamps and medical jargon that sounds so professional, so legitimate, that nobody questions it. You don't need to physically restrain someone if you can legally prove they can't think for themselves. You don't need to steal their money if you can legally prove you're managing it for them. You don't need to lock them in a room if you can legally prove they need supervised care. Kenneth had used the system, the same system I'd worked in for 3 decades, to erase me. And he'd done it so well that even when I told people the truth, they documented my truth-telling as evidence of my illness. But he'd made that one small mistake, that signature. Rosetta Marie Williamson. It wasn't much, but it was something. Proof that at least one document in my file was forged. Proof that someone, Kenneth, or someone he hired, had fabricated evidence to justify locking me away. I just needed to get that proof to someone who'd believe me, someone who had the authority to investigate, someone Kenneth hadn't gotten to yet. And lying in that nursing home bed, drugged and isolated and trapped, I thought about the other precautions I'd taken. The safety deposit box at First Bank with $78,000 Kenneth couldn't trace, the sealed envelope I'd left with my attorney Martin Schaefer, the security cameras I'd installed in my house, cameras that had been recording everything. Kenneth thought he'd covered all his bases. He thought I'd be too confused, too medicated, too broken to fight back. Would you trust your family with medical power of attorney after hearing this? Tell me in the comments. But here's what he didn't understand. I'd been preparing for this fight months before he made his move, and somewhere out there, Gwendolyn was still trying to reach me. Martin Schaefer still had that sealed envelope with instructions to open it if I was ever declared incompetent. And those cameras had recorded everything Kenneth did the week before my surgery. The evidence existed. It was out there. I just needed someone to find it before Kenneth buried me so deep that nobody would ever look. I closed my eyes, felt the Ativan starting to pull me under again, and held on to one thought. Kenneth had made a mistake with that signature, and if he'd made one mistake, he'd made others. I just had to stay conscious long enough to make sure someone found them. I don't know exactly when Gwendolyn Pierce decided something was wrong, but knowing her, my best friend of 20 years, the woman who'd worked as a paralegal for 35 years before retiring, she didn't give up after being turned away twice. On November 8th, the day after I discovered that forged certification, Gwendolyn did what any good paralegal would do. She started making calls. She called my church. Reverend Thompson told her I hadn't been to service in over a month, which was unusual, but Kenneth had called to say I was recovering from surgery and would return when I was ready. She called my bookkeeping clients. None of them had heard from me since late September. She called the hospital where I'd had my gallbladder surgery. They confirmed I'd been discharged on September 30th, not to home, but to a care facility per family request. And then Gwendolyn called Martin Schaefer, my attorney. Let me take you back to that moment in Martin's office. The clock on the wall read 2:47 p.m. The fluorescent lights hummed. Martin told me later what happened. He'd been in his office on Grant Street reviewing estate documents for another client when his receptionist buzzed. "Mr. Schaefer, there's a Gwendolyn Pierce on line 2. She says it's urgent regarding Rosetta Williamson." Martin picked up immediately. "Gwendolyn? This is Martin Schaefer." "Martin, thank God. I've been trying to find Rosetta. Kenneth put her in a nursing home, Meadowbrook Senior Living, and they won't let me see her. They keep saying, 'Family request, no visitors.' But something feels wrong. Rosetta would never agree to that." Martin's stomach had dropped. "When was she placed?" "September 30th, right after her surgery. Martin, she didn't have dementia. I walked with her every Tuesday. She was sharp as ever. And now suddenly she's in a facility and nobody can see her." That's when Martin remembered. The envelope. The sealed envelope Rosetta had given him in April 2024, 7 months earlier. Remember, Martin Schaefer, my real estate attorney, the one who'd handled Gerard's estate, had been holding a sealed envelope I'd given him 7 months earlier. He'd put it in his safe, marked Rosetta Williamson, emergency only, and I'd been very specific with my instructions. Open only if I'm ever declared incompetent without my explicit consent. Martin hung up with Gwendolyn, walked to his safe, and pulled out the envelope. Inside, he found exactly what I'd left him, copies of my medical records from 2020 to 2024 showing 0 cognitive issues. A notarized statement of mental clarity dated April 15th, 2024, signed by me and witnessed by 2 paralegals from Martin's office, and a directive that read, "If this envelope has been opened, it means someone has attempted to declare me incompetent without my knowledge or consent. Investigate immediately. I have taken precautions." At the bottom, I'd included something else, a note about security cameras installed in my home in August 2024, 4 cameras, cloud backup, login credentials. Martin accessed the footage that afternoon. What he found made his blood run cold. September 23, 2024, 1 week before my surgery. Timestamp 10:47 a.m., my living room. Kenneth let himself in with his key, the key I'd given him years ago for emergencies. With him was a man in his 50s carrying a briefcase, wearing a cheap suit. The footage was high definition. Martin could see everything. The man walked through my living room, measured the walls with a laser tool, took notes. Kenneth pointed out features: the original hardwood floors, the updated kitchen, Gerard's workshop in the basement. Then they sat at my kitchen table. The same table where I'd raised Kenneth, where we'd eaten breakfast together for 18 years, where Gerard had taught Kenneth how to tie his shoes. And Kenneth said, his voice clear as day, "We need this done before she comes out of surgery. Once she's placed, she can't fight it. The house goes on the market October 2nd. I need the cash by mid-October." The other man, Martin learned later he was Russell Crane, an estate liquidator, nodded. "I can do a fast sale. Montbello's hot right now. Bungalows are going for $380, maybe $400 if we stage it right. But you're sure about the timing? If she wakes up—" "She won't be a problem," Kenneth had interrupted. "I've got POA. I've got medical documentation. By the time she's coherent enough to question anything, it'll be done." Martin watched that footage 3 times. Then he called the Denver County Court and filed an emergency motion. What Rosetta revealed next left Kenneth speechless. Subscribe to find out. If you're still not subscribing, tell me in the comments, what's holding you back? By November 9th, Martin had a court order, immediate independent psychiatric evaluation, cessation of all non-essential medications, access to Rosetta Williamson for legal consultation. He arrived at Meadowbrook at 2:30 that afternoon. With him, Gwendolyn Pierce, a patient advocate from the Colorado Department of Human Services named Sarah Chen, and that court order stamped with a judge's signature. The facility director, a nervous woman named Linda Hayes, met them in her office. A cramped room with fake wood paneling and a desk piled with folders. The air smelled like stale coffee and anxiety. "I don't understand," Linda was saying, reading the court order for the 3rd time. "We have all the proper documentation for Mrs. Williamson. Her son Kenneth provided everything." "Call Kenneth," Martin said. His voice was steel. "Tell him to come here immediately and bring Mrs. Williamson to this office. Now." Linda made the calls. 20 minutes later, I was being wheeled into that office in a wheelchair I didn't need. My hands were shaking, partly from weeks of forced Ativan, partly from seeing Gwendolyn's face for the first time in over a month. She gasped when she saw me. "Rosetta." "I'm okay," I said. My voice came out hoarse. "I'm okay, Gwen." Kenneth arrived 10 minutes after that, confident, patronizing. He walked into that office like he owned it, like he was doing everyone a favor by showing up. "Mr. Schaefer," he said, extending his hand. Martin didn't shake it. "I appreciate your concern for my mother, but she needs rest, not legal complications." Then he turned to me, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Mom, you're confused again." "Sit down, Kenneth," Martin said. Something in Martin's tone made Kenneth stop. He sat. Martin opened his laptop, turned the screen toward Kenneth, and pressed play. 47 seconds of footage. September 21st. Kenneth and Russell Crane in my kitchen. Kenneth's voice. "We need this done before she comes out of surgery. Once she's placed, she can't fight it." I watched Kenneth's face drain of color, watched his jaw go slack, watched him realize in real time that he'd lost. "That footage is—" Kenneth started, his voice desperate. "It's out of context. I was protecting you, Mom. I was trying to—" "You told an estate liquidator to list her house before she even had surgery," Martin interrupted. His voice was quiet but lethal. "That's not protection, Kenneth. That's premeditation." Kenneth's hands trembled as he reached for the desk, steadying himself. I watched my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after Gerard died, and for the first time in 38 years, I didn't recognize him. I spoke then. My voice was quiet, steady despite my trembling hands, despite weeks of sedatives clouding my thoughts, despite everything. You were counting on me being too confused to remember, I said. But I remembered everything, Kenneth. I just couldn't prove it until now. Kenneth's eyes met mine. Mom, I was under so much pressure. Charisse, the kids, the debt. So you decided to erase me? My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You forged medical records. You invented a disease I didn't have. You drugged me. You isolated me from everyone who could help. You sold my house, the house where you grew up, where your father died, without even telling me. I was going to tell you. When, Kenneth? After it was too late to stop. He had no answer for that. Martin filled the silence. Mrs. Williamson moved $78,000 into a safety deposit box in April, money you never found. The house sale is under investigation. Your power of attorney is suspended pending criminal review, and as of right now, per court order, all non-essential medications, including the Ativan you authorized, are ceased immediately. Kenneth's face went from pale to gray. Criminal review? Elder abuse, Martin said, ticking off on his fingers. Financial exploitation, forgery, conservatorship fraud. That's just what we can prove right now. There may be more. Kenneth looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear, not for me, for himself. Mom, please, I made mistakes, but I'm your son. You were my son, I said quietly. I don't know who you are anymore. 38 years earlier, I'd held newborn Kenneth in that same house and promised to protect him. Now I was protecting myself from him. The silence in that office was suffocating. Linda Hayes looked like she wanted to disappear into the fake wood paneling. Sarah Chen, the patient advocate, was taking notes. Gwendolyn was crying quietly, her hand on my shoulder. And Kenneth looked like a man watching his entire life collapse. Martin laid out 3 options. His voice was professional, detached, but I knew him well enough to hear the anger underneath. Option 1. Mrs. Williamson presses criminal charges. You face prison time, Kenneth. Elder abuse, fraud, forgery, these are felonies. You'll lose your pharmaceutical license. Your wife will likely divorce you. Your children will grow up knowing their father tried to institutionalize their grandmother for money. Kenneth flinched with every word. Option 2. Settlement. You return every penny of the remaining funds, $126,000 from what we can trace. You relinquish all power of attorney permanently recorded with the state. Supervised contact only twice yearly with a third party present. No prison, but you live with consequences. And if you violate any term, criminal charges will be filed immediately. Option 3, Martin finished, looking at me instead of Kenneth. Rosetta walks away entirely, cuts you off. No contact, no relationship. She prioritizes her peace over justice. You avoid legal consequences, but you lose your mother. The room fell silent again. Kenneth's eyes were on me, pleading. I looked at my son. The boy who'd done homework at my kitchen table, who'd stood beside me at his father's funeral, who'd promised to take care of me. And I felt grief, deep, aching grief, not for what he'd done, but for what I'd lost. The son I thought I had, the trust I'd given him, the future I'd imagined where we'd grow old together and he'd visit on Sundays, and his kids would remember me as the grandmother who baked cookies and told stories about their grandfather. That future was gone. Kenneth had sold it along with my house. I need 48 hours, I said finally. My voice was steady, but my heart was breaking. I need time to decide. Martin nodded. The court order stands. You'll undergo independent psychiatric evaluation tomorrow morning. Dr. Yolanda Ramirez. She's expecting you at 9 a.m. Kenneth started to stand, but Martin held up a hand. One more thing. That forged physician's certification. The signature says Rosetta Marie Williamson. She never uses her full middle name. That's how we know it's fake. Who forged it, Kenneth? Kenneth's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. We'll find out, Martin said. And when we do, that's another charge. Kenneth left without looking at me. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt like the end of something irreparable. Gwendolyn helped me back to my room. She stayed with me until visiting hours ended, holding my hand, not saying much. What was there to say? That night, lying in that nursing home bed for the last time, I couldn't sleep, not because of the medications, they were finally out of my system, but because I kept thinking about that choice Martin had laid out: justice, settlement, peace. I'd spent 30 years working in law. I knew what justice looked like. I knew what it cost, and I had 48 hours to decide if my son deserved it. I spent those 48 hours thinking. Lying in a hospital bed at Presbyterian St. Luke's, they'd transferred me there for the independent psychiatric evaluation. I played every option through my mind like a lawyer preparing for trial. Option 1, criminal charges. Kenneth goes to prison. My grandchildren grow up visiting their father behind glass, holding phones to their ears, asking why Grandma sent Daddy away. Option 2, settlement. Boundaries, consequences. Kenneth loses his power but keeps his freedom. Option 3, walk away entirely. Cut him off. Never speak to him again. Dr. Yolanda Ramirez conducted my evaluation over 2 days, November 11th and 12th. She was thorough. Memory tests, cognitive assessments, questions about my life, my career, my family. She listened to my story without interruption, took notes, reviewed the forged documents. Her report, submitted to Denver County Court on November 13th, was damning. Patient exhibits 0 cognitive impairment. No evidence of dementia, memory loss, or diminished capacity. Patient was chemically restrained with inappropriate sedatives, Ativan, creating artificial symptoms of confusion. This constitutes medical abuse. Patient's account of events is coherent, detailed, and corroborated by documentary evidence. Martin filed that report with the court and with Colorado Adult Protective Services. Within 72 hours, the conservatorship was reversed. My name, my accounts, my life, all restored. But the hardest part was still ahead. Kenneth was ordered to account for every dollar of the house sale. Martin brought in a forensic accountant, a woman named Patricia Wu who specialized in elder financial exploitation cases. She traced everything. Of the $340,000 from my house, $87,000 went to Kenneth's credit card companies, gambling debt he'd hidden from everyone, even Charisse, $68,000 to casinos, online betting, sports gambling, poker games, $59,000 to his kids' private school, 2 years of tuition paid in advance. The rest, various bills, legal fees for the conservatorship filing, payments to Russell Crane, the estate liquidator. Only $126,000 remained. Kenneth had burned through $214,000 in 6 weeks. Remember Kenneth, my son, the one who'd forged medical documents to institutionalize me, was now living alone in a rented apartment in Highlands Ranch, cut off from his children. On November 14th, Charisse learned everything. Martin had sent her copies of the court filings, the security footage, the forged documents. She'd believed Kenneth's story, that I was genuinely declining, that the house sale was necessary for my care, that he was being a good son. Finding out he'd lied shattered her. She called me that evening. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "Rosetta, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. He told me you had dementia. He showed me paperwork. I thought we were helping you." Would you have pressed charges or chosen peace? Subscribe and tell me in the comments. If you're still not subscribing, tell me in the comments. What's holding you back? "I believe you," I told her, and I did. Charisse was many things, materialistic, pushy, demanding, but she wasn't cruel. she wouldn't have signed off on fraud. "I'm filing for separation," she said. I can't stay married to someone who did this. The kids don't understand yet. They just know Daddy's in trouble and we're moving to Aunt Lisa's in Aurora." By December, Charisse and the kids were gone. Kenneth's marriage collapsed along with everything else. I chose option 2, settlement with consequences. I didn't want Kenneth in prison. He was still my son. And those grandchildren, ages 12 and 14, confused and scared. They didn't deserve the stigma of having a father behind bars. But I wouldn't let Kenneth escape accountability either. Martin negotiated the terms. We met in his office on November 20th. Me, Martin, Kenneth, and Kenneth's attorney, a public defender named Thomas Rivera, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The terms were non-negotiable. Kenneth returns the remaining $126,000, every penny. His power of attorney is permanently revoked and recorded with the Colorado Secretary of State. He can never hold POA for anyone in this state again. He's barred from my financial accounts, medical decisions, and property forever. Supervised contact only, twice yearly in a neutral location with a third party present. If he violates any term, if he tries to contact me outside those visits, if he approaches my home, if he interferes with my finances, criminal charges will be filed immediately. Elder abuse, fraud, forgery, conservatorship abuse, all of it. Kenneth sat across that conference table, pale and hollow-eyed, and signed every document. But before he signed, he tried one last manipulation. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, "you're overreacting. We can work this out as a family. I made mistakes, but—" I reached into my purse and pulled out a small digital voice recorder, the same kind I'd used for decades as a legal secretary, recording client meetings and depositions. "You called me 2 days ago, Kenneth," I said. "November 18th. You thought I'd forget our conversation because of the medications, but I've been recording our phone calls since September." I pressed play. Kenneth's voice came through tinny but clear. "Mom, I know this looks bad, but I had to act fast. You don't understand how much pressure I was under. I couldn't wait for you to—" I stopped the recording. The room went silent. "Couldn't wait for me to die, Kenneth?" I said quietly. "That's what you were about to say, wasn't it?" Kenneth's attorney looked uncomfortable. Martin looked satisfied. Kenneth looked destroyed. "Sign the papers," I said, "or I play the rest of that recording in court." He signed. I used the recovered $126,000 plus the $78,000 from my safety deposit box at First Bank to buy a 2-bedroom townhome in Stapleton, 3 miles from Gwendolyn's house, modern, manageable, clean. No memories of Kenneth rifling through my study or Gerard's ghost haunting the basement workshop. I enrolled in a senior yoga class at the community center, reconnected with Park Hill United Methodist. Reverend Thompson welcomed me back with tears in his eyes. Took on 2 new bookkeeping clients who'd heard about my situation and wanted to support me. My pension, $2,100 monthly, was restored to my control. Martin set up a protected trust for my assets. With him as trustee and multiple safeguards against any future exploitation, I rebuilt my life, piece by piece. But the hardest part was the transformation inside me. Before all this, I believed family loyalty meant unconditional forgiveness. I'd always prioritized Kenneth's needs, helped with down payments when he and Charisse needed money, babysat the grandkids without asking for anything in return, never questioned, never demanded repayment. I saw myself as aging, potentially becoming a burden. I thought I should make things easy for Kenneth by keeping my assets simple and accessible, by trusting him completely, by not protecting myself because protection felt like suspicion, and suspicion felt like betrayal. I was wrong. After everything, after the drugs, the isolation, the forged documents, the stolen house, I learned that loyalty must be mutual. Protecting yourself isn't betrayal, it's survival. Love doesn't mean tolerating abuse. Trust doesn't mean closing your eyes to red flags. Family doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity to avoid conflict. I set boundaries now. Kenneth gets his 2 supervised visits per year. He's attended both so far in May 2025 and September 2025. He apologizes every time, says he was desperate, overwhelmed, drowning. I listen. I don't forgive. Maybe someday I will, but not yet, not while the scars are still fresh. 6 months passed. By June 2025, Rosetta had built a life Kenneth would never be part of. My Stapleton townhome has a small garden where I grow tomatoes and basil. Gwendolyn visits every Tuesday and Thursday. We've resumed our morning walks, now through the neighborhoods near my new place instead of Montbello. Martin Schaefer checks in monthly, making sure my finances stay protected, my trust stays intact. Gwendolyn Pierce, my best friend, the retired paralegal who'd refused to stop fighting when I couldn't, visited every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. My grandchildren visit once a month. Supervised arrangements. Charisse brings them, stays for an hour. We have lunch or play board games. The kids don't fully understand what happened. Charisse told them a softened version. Grandpa's house was sold during a misunderstanding. There were legal complications. Everything's resolved now, but Grandma and Daddy need space. They're 13 and 15 now, smart kids. They'll figure it out eventually. Kenneth has written 3 apology letters, long, rambling things full of excuses and justifications, mixed with genuine remorse. I've read all of them. I haven't responded to any. What do you owe a child who saw your vulnerability as opportunity? I teach a class now at the Denver Senior Center. Protect yourself, legal documents every woman should have. 15 women ages 58 to 82 meet every Thursday afternoon. I teach them about power of attorney safeguards, living wills, medical directives, asset protection trusts. I tell them my story, not all of it, just enough. I show them the warning signs I missed, the questions Kenneth asked that should have raised alarms, the paperwork I signed without thinking. Should adult children who exploit their parents face criminal charges? Tell me in the comments. And I tell them, protect yourself before you need protection. Don't wait until you're in crisis. Don't assume family means safety. Some of them cry during my classes. Some of them share their own stories. Daughters-in-law who pushed them out, sons who borrowed money and never repaid, grandchildren who only visited when they needed something. We're a community of survivors, and we're teaching each other that survival isn't shameful. It's necessary. You might be wondering if she ever forgave him. The answer is complicated. Do I still love Kenneth? Yes, he's my son. I held him when he was born. I raised him alone after Gerard died. I can't just erase 38 years of being his mother. But do I trust him? No. Will I ever sign another document giving him power over my life? Absolutely not. Will I let him back into my home, my finances, my daily existence? Never. Some betrayals don't heal. They just become scars you learn to live with. You touch them sometimes, remembering, wondering if you could have done something differently. But mostly, you move forward. You build new routines, new friendships, new boundaries. I'm 67 now. It's been almost a year since Kenneth put me in that nursing home, since I woke up not knowing where I was, since a nurse told me my house was gone. I'm stronger now. Scarred, yes, but stronger. And I know something I didn't know a year ago. Age doesn't equal helplessness. Preparation equals power. And family loyalty only means something when it goes both ways. Kenneth thought he could erase me. He thought the sedatives would keep me compliant. The isolation would keep me silent. The paperwork would keep me trapped. He was wrong. Because I'd been preparing for a fight he didn't even know was coming. And when the moment came, I won. Not the way I wanted to win, not with my son by my side, not with my family intact, but I won my freedom. My dignity, my life. And that's enough. It's October 2025 now, nearly 1 year since I woke up in that nursing home, not knowing where I was or how I got there. 1 year since a nurse told me Kenneth had sold my house. I'm 67 years old. I'm living in a 2-bedroom townhome in Stapleton, 3 miles from Gwendolyn's house. I teach a financial literacy class every Thursday at the Denver Senior Center. Protect yourself legal documents every woman should have. 15 women, ages 58 to 82, learning how to guard against the kind of betrayal I survived. My health is excellent. My pension, $2,000 monthly, is back under my control. The $78,000 from my safety deposit box sits in a trust account managed by Martin Schaefer, untouchable by anyone but me. Kenneth lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Littleton now. He works 2 jobs, pharmaceutical sales during the week, weekend shifts at a medical supply warehouse to pay off his remaining debts. Charisse and the kids live separately in Aurora. Kenneth sees them twice a month under a custody arrangement. He's attended both supervised visits with me, once in May 2025, once in September 2025. He apologizes every time. I listen. I don't forgive. My grandchildren, now 13 and 15, write me letters sometimes. Tentative, sweet notes asking how I'm doing, telling me about school, confused about why Grandma and Dad don't talk anymore. I write back carefully. I never badmouth Kenneth, but I never pretend nothing happened either. Gwendolyn visits twice a week. Martin checks in monthly, and I'm building something new, something Kenneth can never touch. Here's what I learned. Preparing for the worst doesn't mean you expect it. It means you respect yourself enough to protect yourself. Family loyalty is only meaningful when it's mutual. Love doesn't mean tolerating abuse. And age doesn't make you helpless unless you let others define you that way. If I could go back, I wouldn't change installing those cameras, or moving that money, or leaving Martin that envelope. Those decisions saved my life. What I'd change is believing Kenneth would never hurt me. I'd have confronted him earlier, set boundaries sooner. To anyone listening, protect your assets. Document your mental clarity. Never sign power of attorney without a third-party safeguard. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I sit in my sunlit living room now, sipping coffee, looking at photos of Gerard, and I feel both grief and pride. Grief over losing the son I thought I raised. Pride in the foresight that saved me. I didn't get the ending I wanted, a loving family gathered around me, but I got the ending I earned. Dignity, independence, and proof that I was never as helpless as Kenneth assumed. I'm stronger now, scarred, but stronger, and that's enough. Would you have pressed criminal charges, or would you have chosen peace like Rosetta did? Tell me in the comments. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Drop your country flag and location in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from. And if you're still not subscribed, seriously, what's stopping you? Your feedback means a lot and helps me improve every story.